And so as I'm looking at all these areas, I'm also looking at what does the city need to actually be involved in and what things should they stay out of. And we're so blessed in this area to have really amazing amount of industry and foundations and nonprofits and people that want to be a part of it that we need to use. And then we also just have great innovation here. And so that all of those things we should certainly leverage as a city and mm, as much as possible use those other avenues in order to keep keep the city in the lane that the city should stay in.
You're listening to The Underview, an exploration in the shaping of our place. My name is Mike Rush, and today we continue our question of what is the state of Northwest Arkansas. However, this is part 2 of a conversation with Bentonville City Council member Beckie Seba. She is one of the Ward 1 City Council representatives for the ward where I live in Bentonville. This conversation took place on February 27th after the February 13th Bentonville City Council meeting, where a request from the Accelerate Foundation for an update to the land use plan and subsequent rezoning was submitted. This request from the Accelerate Foundation was an affordable housing initiative that would have benefited Bentonville Public School teachers and district employees. However, the City Council voted 4-3 to reject the request, and that has prevented the project from moving forward. But before we get to the conversation with Councilmember Seba and her no vote on the proposal, I think it may be helpful to hear a few of the public comments made in the City Council meeting where this proposal was voted on. I posted a link in the episode notes to the entire City Council meeting, and I would encourage everyone to watch it. These are some of the comments by those involved in putting this before the City Council before it was voted upon. The first voice you'll hear is Rogers attorney Bill Watkins, who is speaking on behalf of the Accelerate Foundation.
Thank you, Mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Watkins on behalf of the applicants. I think it's important for the audience at least to understand what is before this body tonight and what's not before this body tonight is the politics of this concept and its legality. Arkansas Attorney General's office, the attorney for the school district, and the attorney for the Accelerate Foundation have all issued formal written opinions stating that this is legal and proper. The only thing before you tonight is the rezoning and land use aspects of this.
Our next speaker is Debbie Jones. Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Debbie Jones, Superintendent of Bentonville Schools. I thank you, council members, for considering our request tonight. I stand before you not as a large corporation, but as Bentonville Schools. And Bentonville Schools has been faithful on its promise on delivering excellence. And we intend to continue to be faithful to that promise. In order to do that, and providing excellence in academics, in fine arts, in athletics, there's a secret, and it's to hire the very best. And in order to do that, we need to be able to attract and continue to retain all kinds of staff, teachers, parapros, bus drivers. There are so many employees within our district, and over 1,000 of those employees on a single income would be eligible to apply for those 40 dedicated cottages within our project. We have challenges ahead. I know you see it as a city. We feel it as a district, and this is simply a solution to address one problem for our staff, as they have many options to continue to work outside our district. We need to continue to be an option for them to come to Bentonville Schools. Thank you for your consideration. This is a good return on investment for our school district and for our taxpayers. This parcel of land is dedicated for this purpose. At the end of the project, the property value will be paid back to the school district. In the meantime, 40 of our staff members, employees have dedicated space to live for up to 5 years. And then of those that have participated in the shared equity program can walk away with a check around $50,000 to invest on their first home. It is an honor for us to give them this opportunity to live in our community and work in our community. And it's also an honor to have those 60 apartments in the middle, for which many of our employees will be eligible. Our workforce needs the opportunity to live close to our schools. We're giving them the opportunity to do this with this project. Thank you.
I'm Jeff Webster, CEO of Accelerate Foundation, living here in Bentonville. Thank you, Mayor Horman, council members, for the opportunity to speak. What I want to touch on is a little bit there's some misinformation out there, a lot of stuff swirling around this project. So maybe to clear up a few of these things. Who are we, first of all? We're not big business that people talk about. We are a nonprofit. We are a community foundation. We are a public charity. That's who we are. We're not a private foundation. We're the 100% owner of this initiative. We will own all of these different units there. There will be 100 of those, and we are the developer of it as well. So at the end of the day, you know what we do. We help the citizens of Northwest Arkansas. We've invested over $125 million in Northwest Arkansas in terms of helping citizens. We've done things such as help build the Women's Hospital, the Arkansas Children's Hospital. We've put $1 million into building the Bentonville Community Center. We've invested and distributed millions of dollars to the citizens in Bentonville when they struggled with emergency rental assistance, including part of that coming directly from our foundation. And who those people are, we help people through HARC. So we've helped the thousands of people within Bentonville. What do they tell us far and away? What's the number one thing I need help with? I need help with housing. That's what they say to us. So, but this really isn't about us tonight. It's about the zoning. But I do want to mention this question around taxes. People are confused about this. This is going to raise the taxes if I live here. No, it isn't. This simply works the following way. We all pay taxes. I wish we didn't either. But we pay federal taxes. The money goes to the federal government. The federal government turns around and allocates the money to the states, a portion of this, to get workforce housing built. Then ADFA in Arkansas and Little Rock turns around and says, we are going to make that money available. Our Bentonville money, the money I paid in and the money all of you paid in, we're going to make it available to viable projects. And so the question is our money coming back home or not? Because it's coming to Arkansas and it's going to some city within here. So we are the champion to get our money back into our state. In addition to this, it's a $25 million project, and we will invest $5 million of our own grant money from our foundation. It's, I believe, the second biggest grant we've ever made as a foundation to support Bentonville. But it's not about taxation. What you're going to hear tonight is some valid concerns from citizens north and south here with respect to water, and you're going to be concerns around traffic. Those are both valid points that I think need to be addressed, and they will be addressed during the large-scale process, but it's not really about the zoning. So the last thing I'd say on this is we're not your conventional developer. Hopefully you already know that and you garner that from what I'm saying. And what we're not going to do is help our neighbors between 18th Street and 21st Street and forget our friends and neighbors to the north and south on 21st Street. That's not who we are as a foundation. We will do this the right way and make sure we support them. Thank you.
Okay, this is Mike again. In my opinion, there isn't much discussion of substance before the vote. However, please go watch the entire city council meeting and judge for yourself. I want to include a comment from council member Bill Burkhart around his support of this affordable housing proposal. The vote on the decision came after these comments.
I appreciate everybody's comments tonight, and I understand the concern about what happens in your neighborhood and how that is addressed. The zoning here, as and I will just show this because I was trying to understand some of the emails that I had. And we are under a current land use plan until the other one is adopted, which encourages this. So it's not like we need to wait for anything because we spent 4 years on that plan in 18 to get that completed, and we're under that guideline currently. If you see here, everything in this is medium density. Everything. And the rezoning request is medium density as well. It's not high density. This is a perfect fit for transition. And unlike all other zonings we've ever had that I know of, unless it's PRD or PUD, we actually know what they're going to build, which is much less than what R3 allows. So if this is a transition property, it should be in medium density. If it was anybody else, it could be an extreme density. At any price, our average rent's $1,500, $2,000 a month. So not only do we know this is going to be less dense, but we also know the favorable rents because of the agreements and the nonprofits that are involved in this. What I'm trying to understand, if we can get away from all the politics for just a minute, we're talking about $25 million invested by nonprofits and partners coming together to try to solve a problem that we've all been talking about for decades. We even talked about the contribution of land to create these partnerships. We have these partnerships of all these groups coming together to say, we're following your recommendation. We're following your zonings pattern that you recommended in the land use plan. We see that this is a perfect medium density fit. We've talked to planning before we even started this. It was passed unanimously by the planning commission. Everybody's in agreement with this. Where else are you going to get $25 to $35 million worth of value given to you? I can't comprehend this, really. I've been fighting for affordable housing for 35 years. And for the last 2 decades, I've worked diligently, inch by eighth of an inch by eighth of an inch, to try to get affordable housing here. And for the first time, it's not a Section 8, it's not some general project. We have partners coming together that is solely in the interest of providing these houses for whom? Our citizens and our kids. We have a workforce in this building that 80% of them don't even live here. Ask the police department, they'll tell you. Ask the firemen, they'll tell you. They can't live here. And the reason our overhead and our infrastructure gets so out of control is because we'll only have the housing availability that we have. And until we address that, our infrastructure cost is going to be 4 times what it should be, because we're going to have to bring all these people in to do every single service work and activity that we have done, that they work their butts off every night, that they have to drive out of town and contribute nothing in the evening to our tax base. This is a no-brainer for me. I have heard threats. I have heard that I'm going to be sued. I have heard all these different things. The emails today were all over the case. The ones that I got to talk to, once I described what we're doing, oh, well, that's not what I heard. So for those of us that don't want to wait on a process that's going to take probably 2 years, are you going to stop all zonings? We have several more. So I encourage the questions that we had about capacity and stuff like that, Mayor. Are we going to ask that on every one of these zonings as we go through these? Is this a precedent that we're setting, that we're going to require all these type of questions, but just in the space of rezoning? It's never happened before. Why are we dealing with it now? Why are we asking those questions? If it's been voted on and it's been done, why are we injecting questions that we're not going to do on every one of these zoning items after this or 2 weeks ago? So I don't understand the difference between this project and every other project we've done, except I know the players and I know the limit that they're going to do on the density. And for me to wait 3 years for us to see where the plan is, our plan is already in place. And all of the work the housing group's done, all the work that other people have done, the chamber, school, this is a big deal. And to say that the individuals and the public has not had a chance to talk about this, they've been talking about it at the school district, every single board meeting for the last 6 months. We've had conversations of planning. We've had conversations here. So I don't really know. I've heard a lot about this council and administration that cares for affordable housing, wants affordable housing. And we have one come up here that brings it to us in a basket, all with nonprofits. And for some reason we have it that we don't want to do it. I've been so standing support for this, and I commend everybody coming up to work as partners. This is money that they're providing out of the charity of the organization. And if y'all want to look at the charity of this organization and the people that are part of this and say, no, thank you, and that's on y'all. They'll go somewhere else and do this. And I'm ashamed of this.
Okay, Mike again. Hopefully that gives a little more context to the conversation that comes next. And one more thing before we jump in, I do want to acknowledge that I sent an email to Councilmember Seba prior to the February 13th City Council meeting asking her to support the affordable housing proposal. I want to be clear with that because she agreed to sit down with me knowing that I did not agree with her on her no vote. She didn't have to sit with me, and so I'm really thankful that she would. Also, I made one edit to the conversation where I mistakenly said that this issue was approved by the Arkansas Supreme Court, and Councilmember Seba corrected me because it was the Arkansas Attorney General and not the Arkansas Supreme Court. I removed that just for clarity of discussion, but I want to make sure you were aware just in case it created any confusion in our conversation. Okay, I don't have anything else to add. Let's jump on in. Councilmember Seba, thank you very much for sitting back down with me. I'm very appreciative of you being here again today. So I wanted to follow up on just conversations really specifically about affordable housing. There's been a few affordable housing things that have come across the city council's desk that you have voted not to move forward. And so this is trying to be just an honest conversation about why and understand and trying to get our heads around that. And so I think what prompted my request for this conversation was that you voted no to the request to rezone a 7-acre plot of land that would have been used by the Accelerated Foundation to provide an affordable housing option to benefit Bentonville Public Schools. Is that a fair assumption of that?
Yes.
The rezoning request, just for the record, was supported by the Bentonville Public School System. It was approved as proper and legal. And it even went to the Arkansas Attorney General where that was permitted. And then there was a 6-0 recommendation to the city council from the Bentonville Planning Commission. And so I think ultimately I would like to understand why you decided to vote against that and where we can start this conversation of trying to understand that.
Sure, absolutely. So I have received a lot of feedback after the vote, obviously, people wondering why I voted the way I did and concerned about the vote. Equally, had people reach out to say thank you for voting this way. And I've seen a lot of feedback that it was a result of some kind of tallying, how many for, how many against, or not voting for something that was about flooding or traffic or something like that. I think if you look back in my record, you can see that we've had a lot of those not in my backyard zoning changes come across our council. And I have probably overwhelmingly voted to go ahead with new zoning for development, that sort of thing, because I've dug into the issues and have determined that those things will be addressed and will not be a problem. And overwhelmingly, my stance is that property owners should have the right to do what's highest and best for their property. The problem is that this is a lot more nuanced than that. This is not private property. This is public property. So while the zoning on its face may have been a doable thing for the property, I had to look deeper than that. And I had to look at it from the stance that this is public property. But the legality aside, which we can talk about in a second, we also have to look at the fact that this is a public property that citizens of Bentonville in some way provided. And so looking at, and what I've said in city council that day was, listen, planning commission just said, hey, we need to hold up on some things until we get a clear picture of what this city direction needs to be going in. They, for some reason, they did it on something that I actually thought, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But then they didn't do it on this project. This project to me is much larger in scope as far as, is this a direction that we're going to go in? And it has a lot of implications for other public properties in the future. So I was looking at it holistically in the sense that we have something coming up here, Plan Bentonville, that is specifically designed to take stock of what we have coming down the pipe, take stock of our growth, take stock of the areas in which we need to improve, we need to dig into in order to make our city the best possible city we can have. If Accelerate and Bentonville Public Schools, I believe, had done a better job of actually reaching out to the community. And I have seen, oh, well, they talked about it in the school board meetings for a long time. I get that.
that's a very limited scope of who will get that information from going to or listening to school board meetings. So that's a very limited group of people. We did have media fawning over this, so you would think that there would have been a great public outcry for going ahead with this if it was just based on media. The problem is that the people that really need to have a voice in this did not really hear from Accelerate or from the Bentonville Public Schools. And it's not on them to try and dig into it. It should be on the people that are trying to make this change to actually reach out, to get into the community, to do all the things, to set it up for community approval or buy-in or whatever it is, if it's legal. I say all this with the caveat, is this legal? Now, we have this opportunity to come up, and if that is coming up in Plan Bentonville, there's a kind of a thought process of, because this is time specific for Accelerate and for Bentonville Public Schools, it doesn't mean that Bentonville should rush into something that is not right for our city. So, and that's exactly what I said in City Council. I said, look, we should table this. We should have the opportunity to bring this before the people of Bentonville to really make sure they understand what it is, to make sure they understand that we may be putting the cart before the horse here in terms of the legality of it. I'm going to keep going back to that. We may be putting the cart before the horse and giving them an opportunity to weigh into this. And I'm not talking about the people that are coming and saying some of the things. I get it. Some of the comments that were in City Council were clearly not informed comments. And so I bring that up to say I did not make my decision based on uninformed comments. I tried to do, I weighed this, I measured it, I prayed about it, I did everything that I could possibly think of to dig into it. I spoke with lots of people. And I think that at the end of the day, what I recommended is still what I recommend. I'm not saying that this is off the table, although I do have some problems with it that would need to get cleared up. I'm not saying it's off the table. I'm saying it needs to be a broader discussion before we start this, because this would set a precedent that maybe we can't put the worms back in the can if we don't really flesh it out. So then the next thing is going to the legality of it. I've spoke with several state representatives and senators that cautioned me, hey, this is not something that a road you want to go down for the city until it really gets fleshed out. Right now, if we had passed it, we would be going through the development for the property. That would take a lot of resources from the city. If we have to go through a lawsuit because someone challenges the legality of it, that would take resources from the city. And my job ultimately is to represent my constituents, but also to make sure that the city is doing the right things and is stewarding our resources in the best way possible. Therefore, for me, I really had to look at it through this broader lens and ultimately say, what I want to do is pump the brakes, slow it down, make sure it's done right. And it felt like this was again, I've used this word before, and I truly believe it, an emotional plea to ram something in that hasn't really been completely thought through. So I want people to hear that, because I think that the thought is that there are people that don't care about people on our city council, and that's just flat not true. And again, I mentioned this when we talked before. I think that we have to really consider the people that live in this city already, and the fact that we also can make decisions that can make Bentonville unaffordable for those that already live in the city. And that is where I really want to underscore the zoning let's see what happens. The whole idea of, is this the right thing to do for the school districts? Should school districts be in housing? It's a totally different conversation. I think, again, it opens a can of worms that we really need to be sure we want to open. And I wasn't sure.
Okay, thank you very much. So Arkansas is a land owner's states' rights place, right? So the owner of the land would be the Bentonville Public Schools. I realized the owner of that was before the Bentonville Public Schools came about because of public tax funding. The public also has an opportunity to vote for those school members. So they have a public accountability to really, in the terms of schools, to do what those people who they're representing have asked them to do. And when they vote in favor of that, can you maybe help me understand the school board's decision versus the city council? And what did the school board get wrong in trying to represent the people that put them as a part of the school board?
No, I think they did. I guess they thought through all these things. And again, I'm not speaking to that. That's another aside for me, as far as, is that the right thing to do for Bentonville Public Schools, and should Bentonville Public Schools be in the housing business and all of that? That's a different consideration. Again, I'm not beholden to Bentonville Public Schools. I'm beholden to the city and the constituents in the city. And so again, my decision goes back to, is it being good stewards of is it being a good steward of the city's resources? Is it being transparent and open and taking feedback from the constituents of the city in order for me to vote in the affirmative for it? And I feel like, again, I can beat the dead horse, but I feel like we have a lot of unanswered questions that need to be answered. We need to make sure that we have all these boxes checked before we go down a road, and then we're a year down the road into the large scale development of a property, and the legislature goes into session and they bring something that puts a stop to it. It doesn't make sense to me to put the cart before the horse in this instance. It's not, it just feels like, again, we're being rushed to do something because of someone else's deadline. We need to make the right decision despite someone else's deadline. Does that?
I do. I guess I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, someone else's deadline being the date to apply for that
Correct.
Accelerate Foundation. I guess the other deadline would be the school's deadline around hiring teachers to make sure they're prepared for upcoming school semesters as well too. So how do you, like, from an urgency standpoint, this is a long project. The land use plan that we're currently under is not going to change for probably at least 2 more years. So I think, and I know this was brought up in the city council meeting and discussion about this. How do you determine that, and which projects get put on hold until the new land use plan and which ones don't? Yeah, you have to wait for that kind of evaluation.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that has to be taken on the case by case, just like we do with all of our decisions. Does this seem like it's the direction we're going? Does it not? The problem is that this is not the same as all of those. And that's what I continue to just try to hammer home, is that this is not, you say that Bentonville Public Schools owns this land. Okay. Yes, but Bentonville Public Schools, that's the whole point of it. And that's where I just can't, I have to be more nuanced in this vote. I had to be more nuanced in this vote. So do I think that we really should make sure that we're not thinking 5 minutes down the road. We should be thinking years and years down the road when we're going into this now, when we're doing this Bentonville plan. It may be a little bit more difficult to change things,
Okay.
because we do want to hear from people. And I saw an article saying there's 2,000 people took the survey, that kind of thing. That's not the majority. Sure, absolutely. And that's why I know I have been trying to get out the word to as many people as possible. That's why I love the strategy of the pop-ups in places where people are, to get people's opinions versus just having open houses where the normal people who are normally involved are going to be engaged, but then it's a broader conversation. And I think that's a great step that the city's taking. And I feel strongly that we should listen, that we have this opportunity, use it. Don't be myopic in how we're trying to do things. Broaden it. Look at what the people of the city really want this to be and where we want to go. And it might end up being that they want Bentonville Public Schools to go into the housing business. If it's legal, okay. I'm not trying to be the sheriff of Bentonville. I'm purely trying to watch out for Bentonville's best interests. And I believe that we have a great opportunity to do that coming up. And so I wish they would have tabled it, honestly, because yeah, now they're, going to miss their deadline. They have to come back in a year. They can't come back for a year. So I wish they would have tabled it. I wish they would have taken that recommendation. Because again, like I want to see how it plays out. I just don't want to invest city resources into it while we're trying to navigate this.
I'm trying to understand, like, to me, as just a everyday citizen who's not involved in these things, it's incredibly confusing because I feel like I'm trying to understand that there seem to be on the surface some proposals to bring affordable housing solutions. And there don't appear to be a whole lot that are market driven at this point. And I guess I'm trying to understand, like, if the goal is to solve that market driven issue and ride solutions, like, it feels like we need to get really specific really quickly around what are the exact things that need to be done. And it's my understanding that in the Project Arrow conversation, there were some very specific things that were recommended. And I understand those are recommendations. But do we need to start over again in that area? Or do we have active things in place?
I don't think necessarily, but what people need to understand is that government moves slowly and it moves slowly for a reason.
Okay.
There are things in place, but they have to go through a lot of levels in order to, or there are a lot of things in process, but they have to go through a lot of levels to determine feasibility. I'm the same way with you. I'd like to see some of these things start to go through, and I think that we have seen like variances that have been allowed and that kind of thing. The thing is with private for-profit, one of the considerations is not financial consideration for the city. That's not one of the considerations that the Board of Adjustments and the Planning Commission take a look at. Is this variance needed because it's a financial thing? Well, ultimately, this all comes down to finances, right? This all comes down to if it's a financial consideration for the developer and the developer can't build it because of this financial consideration, then they're going to have to build a more expensive product, or they're not going to build it at all. And so that's something that I'm digging into right now is what are the considerations that we are willing to take in order to help these developers bring an affordable product? And do we have the right considerations? And that's something that I'm actually actively looking at right now with a specific project. And I'm not at liberty to say who that project is, but if there are other developers that are out there that are saying, like, I can't build an affordable product in Bentonville because of these hoops, I'm happy to hear from them. Real estate and development, that's my area. That's why I'm trying to dig into this to understand. And I'm happy to continue the conversation to say, what is it? What are these areas that we can be fixing this problem? Because it's a problem we've caused. Other municipalities don't have this problem. They're building affordable products because they have a much shorter timeline. They have different methods to get things changed. And that's exactly what I'm working on right now.
Are there timelines associated with that? I think to me, it still feels very vague, right? So, like, I think, and again, for the purposes of clarity and saying, I think the motivation, if I'm honest with myself, behind it is I don't understand, or I'm trying to understand. Like, there are solutions that seem to check the boxes that I understand that they should check. And then there's solutions that aren't possible in the market space because of a lot of, frankly, it sounds like bureaucracy, if I'm honest. And so, how do we wade through the bureaucracy? Developers have that responsibility to do that. School teachers, at the end of the day, that's not their ability. So they have other people that are working on behalf of them to try to understand that. And at the moment, it feels like it's just paralyzed in many ways. So is that a fair characterization?
No, I
Okay.
I don't think it's paralyzed. I think that people in our planning department are very anxious to help with this issue. I think that you've seen support from people that are in charge of our city's
Well,
plan.
sure. They recommended
Yeah, and
teacher
I'm not
proposal.
talking about staff
Okay.
versus the planning
Right.
commission, but again, this is something that I, as a pretty much a layperson when it comes to development, like I'm not a developer, but as a layperson, I can go and I can say, like, these are the things that I see. These are the issues that I see. Why are we stuck on this? Why can't we, what do we need to change here? How do we fix these things so that the problems that we're facing become that these are the pathway is a lot easier. Then the entire planning department has to go through and say, okay, these are the things that we can do. This is why this is not going to work. This is why, and that's the process. And the process is not just like, I want this done and let's get it done. There are a whole lot of levels that we have to rely on staff and their expertise to say, we need this much parking. And then we really have to make sure that's well understood by the decision makers, because even I, like, we've
The decision makers being
the city council,
okay.
because there have definitely been split votes on some developments that have gone in because concerns about parking, concerns about all these zoning things and code things. And so it's a matter of communication and I think that could definitely be better. I think it definitely could be better between um, city council planning. And we try to do once or twice a year combined between planning and city council. And that's helpful, certainly helpful. But again, it is unfortunately, but probably by design, government is slow. And we have created this problem over a long period of time. And it's not something that can be changed immediately. But I really do believe that most of the people are concerned with this issue. It's not that everyone's just like, well, that's just the way it is. I truly believe that people are concerned with this issue, but they're concerned that it's done in the right way, and it's not going to get solved in a day. And again, the whole teachers and all that's a different conversation than affordable housing in general. But I do believe that the city has a role to play. I think gears are turning, even if you can't see them, and even if they're slow, they are turning. And I think we do have a all of us kind of have a similar goal. We're just it's a matter of how do we get there and what mechanisms need to be pulled and levers need to be pulled to get there. It's not, I know it's not the answer everybody wants. Like, we want to snap our fingers and we want to say this is this.
No, I hear you. I understand it's complex. The government has to work for the people, right? And so I think that's maybe the root of the question is in this area of affordable housing that dominates so much of what our needs are and are going to be. How are our government functions working for us in order to help alleviate this problem, to make this a community that is open and accessible to people of all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of income levels that are part of our city, are contributing to our city? How, if the government has no role, then fine. But the government, in this idea in the cloud, right? Like, how is the government working for the citizens of Northwest Arkansas to solve this problem?
Yes, I agree that the government does have a role. And I like you said, it's complex, especially in a city like ours that is growing at the rapid pace that it's growing. I think I'm a year into this role and I cannot claim to know how to do it all. I'm wading through. It's a learning curve. I'm trying to figure out who do I talk to for these things? How does this go? And we do have people that have been on city council for a long time that have to put their edge in maybe a different way than they think in order to solve this problem. But I think there certainly is a role. And I'll go back to this again. That role needs to consider the current citizens of Bentonville as well as the citizens that we want to be able to move into our city. And that just brings more complexity to the conversation as well. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I don't have all the answers. I'm wading through it, and I do see people headed in the same direction. It's just that there are some differences and opinions on how to get to where we're going. And that's gonna have to be fleshed out. And certainly the legalities of all of these things have to be considered as we move down the path.
Yeah, I think for me to zoom out from a technical government function to say, what is the purpose of land use plans? What is the purpose of zoning? It's to create a community that hopefully is available to as many people as possible. And so when we make decisions about how those kinds of mechanisms are able to include people, we're also making decisions about what people will be excluded from that. And today, that seems to be that it's an exclusion based on how much money they make. And we hear this term workforce, not a fan of the term workforce, but we hear this need from everyone we talk to about the need for more affordable housing. And yet at the same time, we're not moving forward to do that. So how do we use the systems of government to include more people into our community? Otherwise, it just sounds like we as a community don't even want affordable housing. Maybe are we trying to exclude people from our communities who don't financially have the ability at the same level that others do to be a part of it? So how do we solve that problem? Do we solve that problem? Is that a problem?
Well, I think that if we're going to get into like the finite of the deal, we can look at the public schools as an example. Bentonville Public Schools is really strong. Are the numbers, the budget, the financial state of our Bentonville Public Schools is strong. I think we've all heard like, oh, we can't hire any teachers. I think that's disingenuous. I think that we've hired lots of teachers. Now we've had a few teachers that have said, I can't afford to live here. We don't even know what that means. Does that mean that they can't afford the same house that they had in the place that they're coming to the place that they're moving to? Well, that's pretty ambiguous. Dr. Jones herself lives in Centerton because she wants a certain house in a certain type of neighborhood and that kind of thing. And that she found it in Centerton. I think we have to, and I'm not poo-pooing the entire thing. I'm not saying that that there's no issue. I'm just saying that what really is, do we even know what the issue is? Is it an issue? You're absolutely right. I have to understand all that because, and is it a new issue? That's the other thing. We've talked about my situation. I couldn't afford, when I was moving here as a teacher, I couldn't afford to buy in Bentonville in 2003 when it was houses downtown were $100,000. This is certainly, there are things you get to do as you move up in your career, as you make more money, as grow in your net worth and all those kinds of things that you don't get to do early on. So I'm not saying that to have a lack of empathy or any of those kinds of things, but it's just such a nuanced topic. And we're trying to dig into it and we're trying to figure out how do we do these things. I'm most specifically interested in what is the role of the city. And I feel like I'm very clearly laid out what my belief is on that. I don't think that there's any ambiguity in what I think is the path for the city to help in this area. And I've also been really clear about that you I believe strongly that you don't take from someone that has to give to someone that has not without their permission and their desire to do that. And so I again, there's an issue. We're working toward trying to solve it. We've got to figure out the way to do that 100%. I agree with you on that. But we really also just need to understand what is the problem? Is there a problem? Is there we need to drill down on all of these things in order to understand it. And that's where we're having the conversations and it's top of mind. And I think I'm happy to listen to anyone that wants to tell me this is what I believe. And I'm happy to talk with them. I'm happy to share my story to just like we're doing here. But it's not, like I said, it's not something that I think we can solve in a day. And we have to.
Well, and you were a teacher and served the city of the students and people of Bentonville. And so I would assume you have a better understanding of what that looks like than I do. So, but I think the other flip side is if the solutions we bring for teachers, firefighters and policemen and the people that are helping make this city grow, we can either bring solutions or find solutions to lower the cost of housing, or we're going to have to tax people more to pay teachers the wage maybe that they deserve. So,
Which we're already having to do. The Learns Act has raised the minimum salary for teachers to a point where that just a few years ago, that was the cap for teachers that didn't have master's degrees. So that's something that we're already having to do. And so that's another thing. Like there should be some results from that allow teachers to be able to afford more. And this is a new thing. So we do need to see like how does this Learns Act and the hiring of teachers came before that. The issue with hiring several teachers who couldn't afford to find housing came before the Learns Act came through and before these changes in public school salaries. We're talking about teachers, that doesn't impact firefighters and all of those types of things. But we are certainly having to talk about teachers. And so the revenues from Bentonville Public Schools, the finances are strong for Bentonville Public Schools. There should be ways that Bentonville Public Schools should signing bonuses or those types of things to be able to say like, yeah, we get it. It's more expensive here. We're going to help you with this. And from millages and school funds that we've already promised. So
yeah. And again, I'm trying to get an understanding of like, at the end of the day, the school board and the superintendent of Bentonville Schools says this is something that they need. And it feels like that's their responsibility and their accountability to make decisions around how they use their resources for the purposes of education.
yeah, it just needs to be legal. And you asked, we need more solutions. So that's why I brought those things up. I think that there are solutions that the school, if they want my opinion on it, I'm certainly willing to give it. But like you said, that's and again, I'm not responsible for the Bentonville Public Schools. I'm not responsible for their budget, how they determine to use it. I know that their finances are strong. And they could potentially use those to hire teachers. And again, we don't know what the situations were for those 4 or 5 teachers. I don't even know what the numbers are that determined that this was not a good move for them. People make decisions that things are not a good move for them all the time for various reasons. And I'm not trying to say that it's not a problem. I'm just saying I need to understand that problem better. If that was the only thing that I was looking at, and it was not. In my decision with affordable housing, my role is to look at is with this one particularly with the public school affordable housing is what are we going to get ourselves into as a city legally what are the unintended consequences of passing this zoning now? And then for all the other reasons that I stated.
But if I can interrupt you just real quick, the request was a revision to the land use plan and subsequent rezoning. That's it. So is there a legal exposure to the city for approving a revision to the land use plan and rezoning that wouldn't the legal exposure be to the school district?
However, as the city is highly involved in the large scale development of a property, we are certainly pouring resources into the project. Not knowing what the ultimate outcome of that's going to be on the legal side, I feel like it was putting the cart before the horse.
But on the legal side, I do realize that the state legislatures, when they found out this was happening, Accelerate School Board went down and met with them. And Arkansas Democrat Gazette reported that this now may be a subject for the legislative agenda next year. And so, in a way, that seems to indicate that it would actually block these types of things. And so, we have a situation which is ultimately the school board, city now going to a state level around affordable housing to determine if it's legal. And
For the schools to be involved in affordable housing, not if affordable housing is
right,
legal.
you're correct. Yes, that's correct. For the school district to be. And so it just doesn't, I guess my question is, how do we navigate through this as a city council member? If you're going to say, if this kind of situation comes up again, or another affordable housing, and I realize these are all different and they're unique and I understand the complexity of it. What does our community need to do? What are the solutions that you feel like can be put in front of the city council if it makes it that far, right? To something that you would say yes to affordable housing. And I'm fine to say, like, what was it around either the school board or I guess it's Southwest I Street, or yes, like if those are going to keep coming back, it doesn't feel like they're going away. What do you want to see differently? Or is this a sit down with those planners more directly to have a conversation about the nuances of it? Or is there a policy aspect at place here that anytime something comes in front of the city council from a policy standpoint that doesn't meet this guideline, is the expectation should be that it's probably going to be a no from your
No,
perspective?
that's not true. In fact,
Okay.
we have actually had people that have come to us after planning commission has told them no, and we're ultimately the deciders. So again, for me, it's a case by case basis, and I have to look at all the facts for each case. Colleague Place, I believe that's what you're
That's
referring
correct.
to.
Yeah.
And we voted against waiving or paying their impact fees, but that project is still going to go on. They will find the funds, which I believe is the right thing for them to do. They'll find the funds outside of I think that there are lots of ways for people to get involved, and people should I'll just give you an example. Fellowship Bible Church has done an incredible job with homeless, with food insecurity through Samaritan ministries. They currently have donated a huge parcel of their campus in Rogers for Samaritans. They can do a major food production facility there. They're putting their edge into food insecurity and homelessness and providing for the people that are living in poverty in our area as the church. And the church people are generously donating to that. I spoke with my pastor we exchanged conversation about affordable housing. And I said, absolutely, our church should get involved in this. If we're going to be the hands and feet of Jesus to our community, absolutely, this is something that the church should get involved with, if with affordable housing. So I think that certainly these types of things should reach out to other opportunities. We cannot take money that we have earmarked for one section of the budget and move it to another section of the budget without making it whole. That's the bottom line. So it's not that project can't go forward. There has to be another avenue for which it can go forward. Is the city allowing things in that? Are there variances that can happen in that subdivision in order to make it more affordable? Yeah, let's see what they are. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board for that. But again, I feel that this first kind of going around and same answers are coming out of my mouth because they haven't changed. The city has roles that the city can play. I believe that we are not pulling all of those levers that we can. My goal is to push for that because I do think that's something that is within the scope of what our city government should put our agenda with. And that's my commitment, is to not just let things ride for another however long like they have been, so that we can start turning it's ocean liner or the carrier or not a cigarette boat. And that's my commitment to my constituents and to the city.
Well, Becky, thank you for your time. I appreciate your willingness to sit down and at least answer the questions around why we're making the decisions that we are as a city and try to give clarity on what that looks like going forward.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, I will never shy away from bringing clarity to my process, how I work through things. I'm happy to hear from anybody on if they have another view. I'm happy to listen. My goal is always to seek to understand. And thank you for providing me that opportunity to just clarify my position and hopefully you'll see in the way that I vote that I remain consistent and that I do have this city's best interest in mind.
Well, if you've hung with us this far, thank you. I know we've covered a lot of ground. As it relates to these two conversations with Councilmember Seba, first I want to say I'm incredibly thankful to Becky for her time, for her to share her story and discuss her role as a city council member and talk about the challenges the city is facing. She was willing to spend 2 hours with me, and some of you know that's way too much time to spend with me. But she was willing to work through my questions for a public interview, not once, but twice. She didn't have to do that, and so I want to say I respect her leaning into the conversation and for being a public official who is willing to stand behind her decisions and try to explain them to someone who may not agree with her. Our community and our culture, frankly our country, needs public officials who are willing to do this. Second, after spending 2 hours with Becky trying to understand the reasons why she did not support the two proposals, I do have to be honest, I can't say that I'm any closer to understanding why the proposals of the Accelerate Foundation and Bentonville Public Schools were problematic. Let me explain. We spent a lot of time over the past few episodes listening to some of our community leaders talk about regional challenges and why housing availability is such a challenge. So much so, it could actually impede the progress of our region. You may ask, why have we spent so much time on this with Councilmember Seba? Well, I was searching for the communal value, the communal belief that we can all circle around, about how we can build our communities to include everyone. And at this point, I have to walk away from these conversations feeling like I'm not sure I found it. I refuse to give up, but for now, I'm just going to have to set that down because I'm not 100% sure where we go next. At least not with concrete next steps or actions to take from here. You see, I want to live in a community that values including people, actively making room for everyone who wants to live here. I think there are a lot of others in Northwest Arkansas who also want this. This conversation about land use and zoning, it cannot be in the abstract. We have to talk about it with real people at the center. I've said this before. This conversation is really not about zoning or land use as a technical government function. This is much, much bigger. This issue is rooted in one basic question about our community. Who will we include in our community? When we're talking about this, about who we include, we're also talking about who's going to be excluded. Finding a home in Bentonville or a place in Bentonville is starting to feel like a story I heard once about a camel and a needle. Unfortunately, we arrive at a place today, at least in Bentonville, where it looks like the challenges are not only going to continue, but likely will only become more difficult to overcome. It's disappointing to see that there are potential solutions available, but there's an apparent lack of willingness by a majority of the members of the City Council to see them move forward or offering real guidance on what to do next. But to be clear, I'm not just disappointed about these two proposals. I'm disappointed because I fear about what it says about the posture of our community to actively make space for everyone. Zoning, land use as a technical government function, about how many people can live in an area, it's called density, is currently the tool that we use to welcome people into our community through a process. But my fear is that they are currently being used to keep people out, people who don't earn enough. But remember, these are people who don't earn enough by choice, so that they can serve the public good. We just really need the public good to serve them in return. I also heard a lot of concern about the legality issue. Not necessarily about it today, but some potential exposure somewhere out there in the future that may or may not materialize. However, today this action has been judged legal. I'm not an attorney, but due diligence was done by the Accelerate Foundation, by the Bentonville Public Schools, and it was agreed to by the Arkansas Attorney General. Maybe it's the fact that this is legal is what's causing fear. If this is legal in the state, what is it about our state that we feel like we need to close the door here? Today, the door is open, but it sounds like there's some activity trying to figure out how to close it. Why? What are we afraid of? This model that was created and first proposed in Bentonville is something that is intended to be repeated. Bentonville's actions have now put that ability in jeopardy, not just in Bentonville, but in any city in Northwest Arkansas and potentially the state. This is the ripple effect that we talked about earlier. Historically, there's a whole lot of reasons why some people can afford and some people can't afford to live in certain places. These are deep, generational, systematic, sometimes institutional things that if we don't understand, we can actually perpetuate them. Housing, or the availability of housing, has been used in the past to create divisions among people, to literally segregate people, prevent wealth from being built, not allow people the tools to escape poverty, and to keep people from having equal access to our communities and systems of government. Housing policies have been and continue to overwhelmingly negatively impact non-dominant culture groups. When we talk about the financial resources people have today, we have to also be mindful of these historical realities that have influenced where we are today. I once heard a man say it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. So what are we afraid of? Well, I'm afraid that we're repeating or perpetuating these systems and policies, not in the abstract of some historical idea, but like tangibly right now to actual people. It feels like there's a fear here about including more people or certain types of people in our community. Look, I hope that's not true. I really hope I'm wrong. I would love to come back and do another episode and say I misunderstood and I was wrong. But for now, all I can look at is the results of these decisions. I heard also concerns about how this can impact the people who already live in our community. Well, here's how it's impacting people in our community today. The lack of affordable housing creates urban sprawl as people build houses farther away from the city, moving into less expensive county areas, which also changes rural communities. It leads to increased infrastructure and city service costs. More roads, more traffic, more congestion, more time in cars. All of that requires more funding, and that creates funding demands that we could actually be using for other types of investments, things that need to be addressed to meet the challenges ahead. We could even use them for increases in salaries for police and firefighters. It increases the impact to our watersheds, and it leads to higher property taxes for existing city residents. Councilmember Seba actually called this out.
So I don't ever want to look at figuring out how do we get new people into Bentonville, into affordable housing, while I'm pricing out the current people because they can't afford their taxes. And so they're having to decide, can I stay here, or am I going to have to move out to a place where my taxes will be lower and I can afford to live.
However, things like the lack of affordable housing are one reason why house prices are going up, and the property taxes with it. I think we can help alleviate the property tax issue by creating more affordable housing in the city. You see, all of these things and more are related to having less affordable housing in our city. And then Councilmember Seba's comment about socialism in part one of this discussion has been a hard one for me to get my head around. I just honestly am not sure what to do with it. The mention of this type of ideology is not something I've heard at the city level before. The dictionary defines socialism as various egalitarian economic and political theories or movements advocating collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. And this is hard because right now I can give you 12 examples of government ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods in our systems today. One example is the government control over the distribution of electricity and water, yet no one on the city council is fighting to change that. Why? Well, because utilities are managed this way to protect customers from monopoly utilities. What is a monopoly utility, you say? Well, it's a market driven solution that controls too much and can fix prices so that the people can't afford them. So, city controlled distributions of things like water and electricity helps keep prices low. It's a good thing. So, socialism is not the idea of taking from one to give to another without their permission. That's just called stealing. So, I would ask that we stop using that term as a sort of boogeyman that is secretly trying to take over our community. Last I checked, the water department wasn't trying to push some socialistic agenda. Maybe their motives are just about making sure everyone is included in their ability to have clean water. So, the belief or the value that I hold is this: we can create communities that include everyone. A community that looks for those that are not included, those struggling, those excluded, those at the margins. I'm trying to understand why we can't work for those together, why we can't take a risk if there is one. I want our leaders to fight to include everyone in our community, not mitigate risk. I want our leaders to stand in the gaps and build bridges and not walls. I want our leaders to advocate for the people in our community, not the institutions, and not hedge our bets because we don't want risk. Leaders risk for people. Leaders serve their community. And Beckie is obviously a person of faith, and I respect that. And she said something in our discussion about the hands and feet of Jesus. Well, I'll be the first one to volunteer to go with her to get those hands and feet dirty by going out to those places where people are excluded and we can bring them in. Let's risk something to make a community for everyone to flourish. Because when those who are excluded flourish, we all flourish. In one of our first episodes, Nelson Peacock said this.
I think about quality of life and character of our communities more in terms of people rather than buildings. People get focused on the building and like, is it too big? Is it too small? But really, it needs to serve what the people need because that's what creates the character of our communities.
I know for certain that the character of our teachers, police officers, and firefighters and EMTs is something that I want as a part of the fabric of our communities, and not just when they're working. I have a list of other standing questions, but I'm not going to go through them because they're all rooted in the same belief. We can create communities that include everyone. This was the belief that I was searching for. I'm sure there are a lot of questions. I'd love to hear yours. Send them in via the website or via social media. Again, thank you for bearing with me through all of this. The original goal was not to spend this kind of time here. However, it's a real example of how our city zoning policies and requested changes, along with city council operations, are working to form and shape our communities. I'll conclude my comments with this. In episode 2, The Invitation, I said these words: we will write these stories together. We just have to decide what stories these will be. So the hope of these discussions ahead is to help shape our communal understanding of our place and each other. Our communal understanding, meaning the things we believe about ourselves and our place, that theology of sorts. So this is the story we're writing. These are the stories that are shaping our communal understanding of our place and each other. Is this what we collectively believe about how we approach this topic of affordable housing? If it's not, then I would ask you to reach out to your elected leaders and let them know. In the episodes to come, we're going to continue with our question about what is the state of Northwest Arkansas. But we're going to expand this and start talking to people who have a voice in different communities that make up this region. And to get started, I'm going to talk with Chris Seawood. Chris lives in Fayetteville and is currently the Corporate and Institutional Giving Manager at Theater Squared. He's also the treasurer of the Northwest Arkansas Martin Luther King Jr. Council, a member of the Northwest Arkansas Juneteenth Committee, and a board member of a new organization called the Zacchaeus Foundation.
She mentioned before we started the broadcast of talking about positive growth, positive urban planning. And my mind started for some reason thinking in colors, and it was like, okay, I was thinking about this, like taking a paintbrush with all these beautiful colors, and it's like sweeping over this beautiful landscape with all these beautiful colors. But and it's like, well, we're going to paint this beautiful picture and it's going to create this beautiful scene. But then I started thinking, I'm like, but I wonder if the painter that's painting over everything with this broad stroke of the brush is considering what's going on beneath the surface of that brush. Who's being impacted? Maybe they didn't want to be painted purple.
Mhm.
Maybe purple wasn't the best color for that particular area of the city. Maybe green was the best color there. So it's equitable to the painter, but maybe not to the people that are being impacted on the ground. So I sometimes am wondering, from the powers that be, are we truly taking into consideration, with all this wonderful, positive, impactful growth that's happening 10,000 feet in the air, are we really taking into account what's happening on the ground, grassroots level? Are you truly talking to the African American community?
Well, I hope you can tell that this is a really powerful conversation that I had the chance to have with Chris. I'm really, really looking forward to sharing it. Okay, on to the route for this episode. I've created routes of all the wards in Bentonville. You'll find a route for each ward on the episode webpage. And I'd love to include ward or district routes from any other city if anyone has those to share. Go and see your community based on the ward where you live. See what is unique, who lives there, where they live, and what challenges you may expect, and more. See the city through the lens and share what you see. And then for our music today, it's a true reflection of the Ozark Mountains. It's bluegrass from Arkansas. Yes, Arkansas, like barbecue sauce, but Arkansas, I think, or something. Anyway, they're great. You'll get a guitar, of course, but you also get a bass, a banjo, a mandolin, so there's nothing to complain about. You'll actually find them in Fayetteville at George's Majestic on March 16th, so go and enjoy, or check out their website for upcoming shows.